Lisa Boivin. I'm a member of the Deninu K'ue First Nation. I am the daughter of Little Wolf and the Most Gentle, adopted daughter of Dirk and Moira Boivin, and most importantly, mother of Jordan Snyder. So I'm not so good with words. This is why I paint. This is why I'm an image-based storyteller, because I need my images to support me. I need the strength and the knowledge of the ancestors to tell you about what I study, to tell you about where I'm from, and to tell you about who I am. This painting here is about a very disturbing case, a case that was overflowing with colonial violence. But I painted this painting in the spirit of reconciliation. The painting is called Searching for Answers in the Garden of Bioethics, and I believe if we search hard enough, if we search long enough, we will find the answers. In this particular case, the answers were found in the cultural teachings of the patient involved. This is also a great opportunity for clinicians, for healthcare professionals, to have a look at the paintings and consider the racism and the stereotyping of Indigenous patients that is so prevalent in bioscientific medicine today. Many Indigenous peoples are land-based peoples. This is where we have our identity. This is where we find our ethical answers. In bioethics, there are certain stories that have to be written and exchanged in order to understand if an action is right or good and takes place in a good way in bioscientific medicine. In Dene culture, there are stories that cannot be confined in the structure of printed words. And I, as a Dene woman, I struggle to explain to my colleagues the reciprocal relationship between land and identity. Children are literally born from the land. So in order for you to understand about who I am and where I'm from, I have to tell you a little story about colonialism. And I didn't know who I was and where I was from until I learned about it in a textbook. And if you can imagine colonialism being so effective that you had to learn that you were colonized in a colonial institution, you will understand my story. So let me tell you about Canada's colonial history. Between 1874 and 1990, 150,000 Indigenous children were taken and placed in residential school. And it was the belief that these children were racially and culturally inferior. When they got to the residential schools, their hair was cut and their skin was cleaned with toxic chemicals. And they were forced to absorb or adhere to the denomination of the school that kept them. And the purpose of this was so these children could forget about who they are and forget about where they're from as Indigenous people, so they could be absorbed into the dominant Canadian Euroculture. In 1958, it was no longer mandatory for Indigenous children to go to residential school, and so the Sixties Scoop began. So between 1960 and 1985, 20,000 Indigenous children were scooped out, were taken out of their homes with little provocation, and adopted out to non-Indigenous homes under the same guise of being racially and culturally inferior, and so they might forget about who they are and where they are from and be absorbed into the dominant Euro-Canadian culture. So what is colonialism and how does it exist in Canada today? So colonialism is the theft of land and resources. It is based on an ideology, it is violent, and it is ongoing. And before we settle into this notion of that was then and this is now, I need to tell you that there are multiple ongoing, unresolved land claims right now in this place that settlers call Canada. Based on an ideology, 150,000 children taken from their homes because they were seen as racially and culturally inferior. Violent. 1 out of 25 of those children died. They were subject to unspeakable violence, spiritual abuse, sexual violence, punished for speaking their language. Ongoing, at this moment right now, there are more Indigenous children in foster care than there have ever been in residential school. So here's where I tell you how I learned to paint. Being a 40-year-old kid, learning about colonization in school, I had to learn things that school couldn't teach me. And I literally had to paint a safe space to heal. So I sought out relationships in Toronto's Indigenous community, and I learned a lot about culture, and I learned a little bit of my language. Here's the good news. We all come with the medicine. So you see in this painting here, you see the prayers of the mother. She's reaching up to the sky, bringing the prayers into the baby. Then we have the prayers that Creator sends us with. They're in utero with the baby. And there are lots of things in this painting that are meaningful to me and that have spiritual meanings. So we have the flowers, which represent the teachings of the ancestors. And then we also have strawberries, which are a women's medicine. One elder told me it's the only berry that's strong enough to wear her seeds on the outside. So I'm going to tell you a little story with 3 parts. As my father says, it's the Indian way. So keep up if you can. So in all my paintings, you see strawberries. I'm very attached to the strawberries. Strawberry was the first word that I learned in my language. And the literal translation is little heart. And when I learned that word, I learned what it was like to be a Dene woman, because I had a vision of my grandmother dressing a caribou and opening up the caribou's chest so carefully and delicately. And in the chest, she saw the heart of the animal that rests so beautifully in the intricate tissue of the caribou's body, just the way the strawberry rests in the intricate flora of the land. I'm also very attached to caribou. I kept drawing caribou antlers without really understanding why. And I guess the caribou medicine really wanted to stay alive in me, really wanted me to know how important the caribou were to my people. So I asked my biological father about the caribou. And he told me for thousands of years, our people had a symbiotic and ceremonial relationship with the caribou. And he told me a story about what would happen if we were here years ago before the settlers. He said when I was 12 or 13 that I would dress a caribou tenderly and lovingly, and I would bring the heart to my father. And then he paused and he said, and then they took me away for higher education. And when I got back here, the caribou didn't come here no more. Now, can you imagine having something so important to your culture, something that sustains you, something that gives you spiritual knowledge, seeing this beautiful, magnificent being, going away to residential school and coming back, and it is gone. Fortunately for me, I learned a new caribou story a few weeks later. And I was taught about how the caribou, the trails, they deviate slightly. Every generation, the old ones teach the young ones where to run so they will survive. And so I thought to myself, our medicine changes from generation to generation, so we will survive. And as I said earlier, our medicine is so strong that we don't even know that we carry it. This is my beautiful daughter, Jordan. She's in San Diego right now. She's watching. Mommy loves you. Mommy loves you so much. And so here we have my daughter, who is also an image-based storyteller. She's a filmmaker. And we have this magnificent medicine going in and out of the camera, And I've painted the strawberries underneath her because she is supported by the women's medicine. She is supported by 10,000 years of Dene's women's knowledge. I have the drum in there. I painted the drum because the drum carries the heartbeat of Dene people, past, present, and future. I painted a hawk feather. As I said earlier, I'm not so good at speaking. I'm very nervous. A friend of mine, a community member who's in the audience right now, here to support me, gave me that feather. And she gave it to me and she said, "It's to help you, Lisa. It's to help you speak to the nurses." And it really helps me speak. It helps me speak with clarity, with kindness, with love. And one day that feather will belong to my daughter. And most importantly in this painting, it's a very, very tiny part of the painting, is the tobacco pouch. And many Indigenous peoples use the tobacco pouch to say thank you to Creator for all these marvelous worldly gifts we get when we walk on this planet. So now you know a little bit about me, about where I come from. This is what I do here at U of T. I painted this for my mother Moira, who's the love of my life, the beautiful woman who raised me. And in this painting, it's fairly obvious what's going on. We all have circles of medicine. Every one of us has a circle of medicine. So here on one side, we have the bioscientific circle of medicine. On the other side, we have a Dene circle of medicine, and they are overlapping. And we have a clinician, and then we have an Indigenous person who are holding hands, and they are creating a new circle of medicine. I always start off my paintings with a black canvas, and for those of you who paint, you know that black is the most aggressive color on the palette. It has the ability to blot out everything. Contrasting the black paint are the bright flowers, are the bright strawberries, are the beautiful teachings of our ancestors. See, I start with a black canvas because the dark colonial history rests on the shoulders of Indigenous peoples here on Turtle Island. And I paint the flowers and I paint the strawberries on top because they illuminate our resilience, they illuminate our strength, and the flowers and strawberries are as bright and beautiful as we are. Thank you.